I can hear you. I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
10 years ago on this day, our lives, all of our lives, changed forever. At 8:46 a.m., September 11th, 2001, the actions of 19 hijackers became apparent to the world when the first of 4 hijacked planes found its target in the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. For many of us, it would be 17 stunned minutes before we would realize that purposed intentions were behind these actions. In shock, we sat by our televisions and watched our nation come under attack. Attack. We were under attack. An idea that was foreign to the vast majority of us sitting in our homes, our offices, or our schools. Questions flooded our minds. Questions that began with how, who, and the biggest question of all, why? Why was this happening? Why were our innocent countrymen dying? Why was this destruction necessary in the eyes of our enemies? As we asked these questions, we would come to learn the face of this enemy all too well. His haunting image would serve as a reminder of how all of our lives would be changed that day. All of our lives. That's my boarding pass. It was a quiet blue sky morning. Me and a friend of mine, a colleague, work colleague, were flying to New York City on business. And everything was normal. I left before the kids got up to go to school. In fact, our connection was in Charlotte, and I called back and said hello and goodbye to everyone and have a good day. And then the flight to New York from Charlotte, and everything was normal all the way into the city. And then, as usual, the pilot greeted us, welcomed us to New York City, and said, "There's the Statue of Liberty out the left. And just ahead, the World Trade Center." And he said, "It looks like one of the towers is on fire." So everybody leans over, looks out the windows, and sure enough, one tower is burning. I didn't hear that pilot's voice anymore. One of the guys that was traveling in business class with us picked up one of the earphones and called a friend of his. He was supposed to have a meeting in the World Trade Center, and he called him to find out what was going on. And what he found, or what he heard, was that a small Cessna or something crashed into the tower. And a little bit later, it was elevated to a cargo plane. A cargo plane accidentally crashed into the building. As we continued on our approach and got closer to the towers, both were burning. I think I understand why I didn't hear the pilot's voice. The view that we had of the towers is much different than the view that most people recall on television. We were up above, and we were looking down on the towers. And the smoke was coming across, and I could actually see the smoke out the right windows. And we flew just over that smoke. And we were in a rapid descent by that point. The flight attendants were rushing everybody to shut seats upright, position the trays down. You know the drill. And we landed in a hurry. And when we got into the airport, we were rushed off of the airplane, rushed into LaGuardia Airport, and as we got out in the main hallway, the main concourse area to leave, to find our way to the car pickup, large men in SWAT gear were already in position, rushing people out and telling people to keep moving. So it had already begun in LaGuardia Airport. Our people were being corralled by their own law enforcement to get out of the building. So we did, and we got out of the building. We were out on the outdoor car pickup area, and there we stood with hundreds of others, wondering what was going on. See, still at this point, we don't know what's happening. At this point, if you're watching at home, you have more of an idea of what's going on than we do. But we learned very quickly that 2 passenger airplanes were intentionally flown into the towers. And of course, then those questions, who would do this? Keep in mind, most people hadn't even heard of Al-Qaeda at this point in time. And now it's a fairly common phrase. We stood out there on that outdoor area waiting for our car, which never came, of course. The poor girl who was supposed to pick us up at the airport couldn't get there because, if you remember, the bridges and the tunnels and everything were shutting down. They were shutting the city down because they thought they had some suspects on the ground. So several hours went by, hours standing out there. We're starting to get hungry. Toothpaste in our bag started looking good. But finally, a guy pulled up in a van, just an old, looks like our church van. And he stepped out and asked if we needed some help. And I said, well, we have no transportation, I'm not really sure what to do at this point. And he said, well, come on and I'll take you someplace. So we jumped in his old van, and I happened to notice he was wearing his yarmulke. And I asked him if this was part of a service. Was he a part of a social help program up there? And he said no. He works from home, and he saw that there was a problem, and he was thinking that somebody might need some help. And one of the bizarre things that was surreal was that while we were standing out there waiting for our car to arrive, it was business as usual with the background music. It was Muzak. And announcements were being made about where to find wheelchairs and where to meet people. But yet there was no movement. It was just very surreal. And business was not as usual after that. I think now you know the rest of the story. Out of the ashes of that day, heroes would rise. Out of the ashes of that day, hope would rise. Out of the ashes of that day, national pride would rise. Out of the ashes of that day, faith would rise. The doors to churches were flooded by those seeking answers for the lingering questions from that day. New spiritual eyes were being opened, and a nation in tragedy was seeking its spiritual father. It was in prayer and faith that the country was finding peace and comfort, and it seemed that a new spiritual awakening was one of the unexpected results of those horrible actions on 9/11. As September 11th has become a day of remembrance for all Americans, for those of us who are followers of Jesus, it has also become a day to remember. Remember that we have hope in desperate times, and remember that we should always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope that you have. We walked away from that day realizing that we lived in a broken world, a world that is filled with hurt and filled with hate. However, we remember because of that day that no matter how far out of touch with our Savior the world may be, it is never farther than He can touch. And because of that day, we are called as believers in our God to remember that if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sin, and I will heal their land.